Boa noite desde Lisboa, boa tarde desde México, 3 horas da tarde no México, meridiano de Iztaccíhuatl. Bem-vindos ao terceiro e último dia deste 15º Colóquio Internacional Malcolm Lowry. Tenho a certeza de que hoje vamos ter um dia muito especial. Vamos começar com uma conferência do nosso amigo da Universidade de Brighton, Nigel Foxcroft. Essa conferência vai ser moderada pelo companheiro Dany Hurpin. Depois, Alberto Rebollo vai moderar uma entrevista com a catedrática da Universidade de British Columbia, Sherrill. E, no final, teremos ainda a oportunidade de apresentar publicamente um DVD e um livro que está prestes a ser editado, que constitui, no fundo, o resumo do 14º colóquio celebrado no ano passado em Lisboa. E, para fechar o 15º Colóquio Internacional, no final teremos a oportunidade de fazer um brindis com o Mescal del Cônsul. Fique connosco, vai ser uma sessão extraordinária. Obrigado. Dany, siga.
Muchas gracias, Marcelo. Bienvenidos a todos en este tercer día del Coloquio Internacional Malcolm Lowry. Seguimos desde Cuernavaca y compartiendo con muchos amigos de varios países. Y hoy, pues, un día muy especial, como lo comentó Marcelo, tenemos el honor de contar con la presencia de un gran especialista inglés de Malcolm Lowry, el investigador Nigel Foxcroft, que trabaja en la Universidad de Brighton, en Inglaterra, y es especialista no solamente de literatura inglesa, sino que también de estudios rusos y europeos. Ha publicado extensamente sobre Malcolm Lowry y debo de mencionar su último libro, el más reciente, que se publicó en Estados Unidos 2019, The Kaleidoscopic Vision of Malcolm Lowry, Source and Shaman, que sería en español una visión caleidoscópica de Malcolm Lowry, almas y chamanes. También tiene artículos y capítulos de libros en inglés y ruso sobre literatura angloamericana moderna, acerca de escritores como James Coetzee, Malcolm Lowry o Toni Morrison. También sobre la literatura rusa, ensayos sobre Anton Chekhov, Mikhail Lermontov y Alexander Pushkin. Y sobre lingüística histórica rusa también ha tenido publicaciones en Francia, Hungría, Japón, México, Polonia, Taiwán y Reino Unido. También ha tenido presentaciones y conferencias magistrales en encuentros internacionales en Canadá, Francia, Japón, México, Portugal, Reino Unido y Estados Unidos. Es su tercera participación en los coloquios Malcolm Lowry que organizamos aquí en Cuernavaca. Tuvimos también el honor de tenerlo el año pasado en Lisboa. Entonces, bienvenido, Nigel. Es un verdadero placer tenerte aquí y, bueno, tener una calidad de investigación tan grande. Te cedo la palabra, Nigel. Adelante.
Hello. First of all, I'd just like to share my screen with you so you can see my PowerPoint slides. Can you see that? I think you can, maybe. I'd like to thank Dany Hurpin, Alberto, Rebollo, and members of the Malcolm Lowry Foundation in Mexico for inviting me to speak at this International Malcolm Lowry Colloquium. Today, I'm going to talk about the Aztec and Zapotec roots of the Mexican Day of the Dead in the kaleidoscopic vision of Malcolm Lowry. As you may know, I've recently published a monograph entitled The Kaleidoscopic Vision of Malcolm Lowry, Souls and Shamans by Lexington Books in the USA. It's an interdisciplinary investigation of the multifaceted, intuitive insight of the international modernist writer Malcolm Lowry through an analysis of a selection of his works and correspondence. In it, I analyze Lowry's psychogeographic perception of the interconnectedness of East-West cultures and civilizations in terms of pre-Columbian Mesoamerican customs, the Mexican Day of the Dead festival, the Atlantis myth, surrealism, and Russian literary, filmic, and political influences. I also trace Lowry's intellectual efforts in pursuing philosophical and cosmic knowledge to bridge the gap between the natural sciences and the humanities. So my monograph identifies Lowry's attempts to reintegrate modernism with primitivism in his quest for an elixir of life for the survival of humanity on the brink of global catastrophe, as indicated in Ballast to the White Sea and Under the Volcano. It also discusses the odyssey on which Lowry and his literary protagonists embark to connect with the past and to gain a deeper insight into human nature in Under the Volcano, Dark as the Grave Wherein My Friend Is Laid, and La Mordida, so particularly in Malcolm Lowry's Mexican cycle of works, in his trilogy of Mexican cycle of works. So I'd like to begin by focusing on the Mexican Day of the Dead, looking at Under the Volcano's Zapotec, Aztec, and Spanish roots. A key aspect of the intersection of East-West cultures and civilizations is the Mexican Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead festival, which is widely commemorated in Mexico and other Hispanic countries. Its origins and evolution were determined by a range of anthropological, cultural, and ethnographic factors. Derived from primordial instincts and from animist and shamanic rituals, this fate is rooted in pre-Columbian Mesoamerican practices, which connected the living with the fallen and determined its initial configuration. Its subconscious dimensions involve an interchange between the material, spiritual, and cosmic realms recognized by the Zapotecs of Oaxaca and the Aztecs of central Mexico. They are interpreted in Under the Volcano, Dark as the Grave Wherein My Friend Is Laid, The Forest Path of the Spring, and in Malcolm Lowry's memoirs. Lowry's cosmic mindset associates the traditions of the Dia de los Muertos with the zenith of the Pleiades, known as the Seven Sisters in Greek mythology, and as Tianquistli in Nahuatl. This constellation was closely observed by the Mayas and the Aztecs. The former were able to predict the risings and settings of morning and evening stars, eclipses, and the revolutions of heavenly bodies. The latter, that's the Aztecs, measured time by the movements of the sun and stars. They viewed the Pleiades as an augury or omen of the dawn of each 52-year calendar cycle. According to the tenets of the New Fire ceremony, if this cluster crossed the zenith of the midnight sky above Quitlautepec, now called Cerro de la Estrella, or Star Mountain near Tenochtitlan, the sun would rise again for a further 52 years. Held in honor of the dead, this rite was dedicated to the goddess Mictlantecuhtli, the Lady of the Dead and Queen of Mictlan, or the underworld, who jointly presided over the afterlife. According to Aztec legends, she ruled over life after death with a husband. However, owing to the subjugation of the Aztec Empire by the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés in 1519 to 1521, this festival increasingly fell under Hispanic influence. It was moved from the beginning of summer to late October and then to early November, so that it would coincide with the Western Christian Triadum, or three-day religious observance of All Hallowtide, also known as Hallowtide or Saintstide or Hallowmass. Lowry adopts the cycle of life, death, and rebirth in his perceptions of souls and shamans interacting on the Day of the Dead. His insight links subterranean, terrestrial, and cosmic domains through journeys, both physical and psychological, undertaken by him and by his literary protagonists. By making contact with the spirits of the dead, he recognizes the need to atone for the debts of the past and to repent for sins committed in an uncertain, belligerent world. There are various influences on Malcolm Lowry with regard to the Day of the Dead and to Mexico, three in particular. A significant influence on him was the Scottish anthropologist, folklorist, and classicist Sir James George Fraser, who had traced an evolutionary sequence in human thinking from the magical to the religious to the scientific. Lowry was mesmerized by his attempts to fathom the workings of the Aztec mind. He frequently cited him in his correspondence and owned a copy of the abridged edition of The Golden Bough, a study in magic and religion. This colossal spellbinding work has been described as, and I quote, a voyage of discovery into ethnography, folklore, and sorcery. It investigates correlations between anthropology, shamanism, and religion, and bears witness to the commemoration of the souls of the dead. Fraser empathizes with efforts to exorcise evil spirits in order to trigger a process of rebirth. He explains that, and I quote, in the primitive mind, it was thought by transferring the evils of a whole people to an individual and sacrificing that individual, it might be possible to get rid of the accumulated sorrows of the entire community, a feat attempted by the consul in Under the Volcano. In his pursuit of the roots of Mexican culture and civilization, Lowry carefully considered the origins of its festivals and their significance as a monument to the past. He was guided by his copy of a reprint of the 1843 edition of the History of the Conquest of Mexico and the History of the Conquest of Peru by William H. Prescott. This eminent American historian and Hispanist had read extensively works on Mesoamerica by the Prussian scientist and explorer Alexander von Humboldt, who had made a prolonged visit to Mexico in 1803 to 1804 to gain insight into its civilizations. Hence, Lowry's undertaking of the Aztecs is largely derived from Prescott's research. Numerous allusions are made to Prescott's historical and ethnographic studies of Mexico in Under the Volcano. In the opening sequence of chapter 1, Lowry portrays the two snow-capped volcanoes, Popocatépetl, meaning smoking mountain, and Ixtaccíhuatl, white woman, which rose clearly and magnificent into the sunset. This description is reminiscent of Prescott's depiction of these volcanoes standing like two colossal sentinels to guard the entrance to the enchanted region. As discussed in Prescott's record, both variants of the Aztec emperor's name materialize in chapter 10 of Under the Volcano, Montezuma and Moctezuma. Yvonne, in the 1940 Under the Volcano, affirms, and I quote, "First of all, I know my Prescott well enough to have learned that the conquest took place in an organized community in which naturally there was exploitation already, but..." He is mentioned too in chapter 8 of Under the Volcano. Everywhere, and I quote, "Everywhere as Prescott informed one, were as attestations to Popocatépetl presence and antiquity," end quote. Another important influence exerted on Lowry was that of Barbarous Mexico by John Kenneth Turner. The security policies of Porfirio Diaz the Mexican general and politician who served 7 terms of office as president of Mexico, are mooted in chapter 1 of Under the Volcano. Senor Bustamante remembers his era when every small US town along the Mexican frontier harbored a consul. He clarifies that they were actually spies. This allusion to the intelligence gathering responsibilities of these consuls is indicated in Turner's record. Senor Bustamante's contention in Under the Volcano that Jeffrey Furman is being pursued by other spiders moots surreptitious espionage activities. Captivated by the allure of adventure and in search of cultural paradise, Lowry was enticed to Mexico twice, in 1936 and in 1945 to 46, and stayed in Cuernavaca and Oaxaca. Following in the footsteps of D.H. Lawrence, who had visited the latter in circa 1924, he was accommodated in the very same Hotel Francia in 1937 and again in 1946. Entranced by the commemoration of the Dia de los Muertos, which he had witnessed in Cuernavaca in November 1936, he ensures that Under the Volcano is launched with a vivid depiction of Guanajuato on the very same day, and transposes images such as the Virgin of Guadalupe from there to there from Oaxaca. The Nahuatl or Tlalhuacan, the Aztec name for his Hispanicized modern-day Cuernavaca. Guanajuato literally means, of course, surrounded by or in the vicinity of trees, and is located near the wood in Under the Volcano. The historical and cultural origins of modern Mexico are traced back to the Aztecs. The consul and Lowry are enthralled by the dilemma facing Mexico: how to adjust to a Hispanic politico-cultural environment, but at the same time preserve Zapotec and Aztec heritage, a quandary which led to the fusion of the various traditions of the Day of the Dead festival. Now I'd like to say a few words about the shamanic and cosmic phantoms. Renowned for their interface with the forces of the cosmos and of the supernatural, the Aztecs and Zapotecs possess rituals rooted in their worship of deities. Some of these rites related to the movements of the sun and the moon, as is evident from excavations in the vicinity of the pyramids at Monte Alban and Teotihuacan. In Aztec culture, death was deemed a mirror of life. It was marked by a symbolic celebration which took place on the first day of the 5th Aztec month. As Lowry was fully aware, the Aztecs believed that on this date, the spirits of the dead would travel back from the underworld as emblems of rebirth to the land of the mortals. The accompanying ceremony necessitated an offering. The ritual slaughter of a young human god who has enjoyed the fatal honor of divinity for a year was meant to satisfy the gods and to nourish the souls of the deceased. Many Day of the Dead traditions are derived from shamanic and cosmic perspectives akin to those inherited by modern-day animist tribes in northern Mexico. The Yaquis or Yomi and the Huichols or Wicarica to worship and communicate with numerous gods and spirits. In recent time, their traditions have become supplemented by Hispanic ones, which, for example, involve giving thanks to Christian images, such as to the Virgin of Guadalupe. In Under the Volcano, Lowry cites the Yaquis, the Papagos, and the Tomasaxics. He refers to them as, and I quote, native peoples exterminated through deportation or reduced to worse than peonage, their lands in thrall or the hands of foreigners. The Yaquis conceived the world as composed of 5 different realms: the wilderness, the speleological, the nocturnal, the surreal, and the floral. They used to inhabit an indigenous spiritual flower world of forests and mountains, which provided an abundance of flowers for offerings and as sacrificial symbols. The attachment of a Mexican marigold to a drumhead during harvest ceremonies is a reminder of the Aztec term flowery wars, which signifies combats fought in order to take captives to be sacrificed. The Huichol Indians practice a pre-Columbian form of shamanism. It is consolidated in pilgrimages to sacred sites. For instance, for example, Viracocha, to leave offerings to perpetuate life and to recreate the world. They bear responsibility for communicating with deities represented by the spirits of plants, animals, and natural phenomena. These include the earth, the sun, mountains, lakes, springs, and the rain. They lead community ceremonies in which a fire is kindled to transform the venue into a temple to facilitate the healing of diseases, which are perceived chromatically. They enter a shamanic state of altered consciousness, SSC, in order to utilize the human body's biophysical capacity. Psychedelic drugs such as mescaline are ingested through the consumption of hallucinogenic plants, in particular the peyote cactus. The extraordinary combination of sacred colors and lights discerned in the shamanic vision of the Huichols and expressed in their yarn paintings is associated with spiritual experience. Their gods are deemed to speak to them in colors. Through auditory and visual input, the visionary and dreamlike awareness attained by the Huichols reportedly enables the perception of entering another world to communicate with power animals or other spirit beings, as do the consul in Under the Volcano and the narrator in The Forest Path to the Spring. A belief which figures prominently in animist communities is a recognition of the significance of the movements of the Pleiades. Lowry informed the editor of the Vancouver Sun that, and I quote, the Egyptians, the Aztecs, the Japanese all worship them. And the festival of All Hallows, All Saints' Day, the Mexican Day of the Dead, etc., are all associated with the culmination of the Pleiades, end quote. Another link to the Pleiades is Laruelle's chevroned modernist zacuali or tower depicted in Under the Volcano, though it is now called the Hotel Bayo El Volcan. And I'd like just to show you this next slide. One moment. There we are. In Ignatius Donnelly's Atlantis, the antediluvian world, we have a native Mexican historian refers to the erection of a very high zacuali, a tower of great height, in order to take refuge in it should the second world or age be destroyed. In Under the Volcano, this astronomical observatory is deemed useless in protecting against the coming of a second flood during a nocturnal culmination of the Pleiades. However, Yvonne is thrust upwards to the stars. Lowry describes her as imagining herself voyaging straight up through the stars to the Pleiades. And under the volcano, I'd like to say just one or two words about the significance of numbers, though, but this is a massive topic. I'll just be very brief on it. And under the volcano, Hurpin identifies what he considers to be bizarre coincidences of events linked to the strange yet repeated occurrence of particular numbers such as 7, 9, and 666 in various combinations of digits. His address is, the consul's address is 52 Nicaragua Street, as explained by Lowry in his typescript. And he says, in my book, 52 adds up to 7. He's referring to the night of the culmination of the Pleiades, the 7 sisters, which follow the Aztec 52-year-old cycle. Lowry engages in a continuous struggle, however, to attain a state of supreme awareness. He skillfully attempts to synthesize the diverse domains of anthropology, psychoanalysis, the Kabbalah, and even voodoo in Under the Volcano. The consul, a shamanic magician, seeks the existence of a divine order in his endeavors to attain an ecstatic state of consciousness. He follows astrological signs and Kabbalistic wisdoms in his eternal quest for the holy grail of ultimate truth. Blending international modernism with shamanism and the Kabbalah, he cultivates moral and spiritual regeneration. Traumatized by the devastation caused to Aztec civilization, Lowry is intent on overcovering his inner struggle and interpreting the workings of the universe. Now I'd like to focus on the Day of the Dead itself. The Dia de los Muertos is a colorful Mexican festival of pre-Hispanic pagan spiritual origin. Deeply rooted in the traditions of Zapotec and Aztec civilizations, it has been enriched by subsequent Spanish Catholic influences. Celebrated on November the 2nd each year by the wearing of dazzling masks and exuberant costumes depicting skulls and skeletons. Singing and dancing accompany the lively sound of mariachi music to connect the living with the spirits of the dead. There are candlelit processions and all-night vigils at cemeteries. Offerings of nourishment are laid out for the departed in graveside display of the favorite foods and beverages of the deceased. As in the next slide, there is a tradition dating back to the Aztecs of offering flowers, especially orange marigolds, to the spirits of the deceased on the Day of the Dead. The perennial plant Tagetes lucida, known as Mexican mint marigold, that's to say tarragon, was used to make yaulitli, a form of ritual incense. Associated with the rain god Tlaloc, it possesses anxiolytic, that is to say, tranquilizing properties. It was one of the ingredients of a medicinal powder used by the Aztecs and blown into the faces of those who were about to become victims of human sacrifice. It is still used by Huichol shamans to achieve an altered state of consciousness. In Under the Volcano, the annual ritual of the Day of the Dead is taking place in Guanajuato in November 1939, as illustrated by the next slide. This custom provides an opportunity for the living to pray for the souls of the deceased, with whom it is believed they are enabled to communicate during this brief spell. As Laruelle and Vigil toast the health of their hero, who died that very same day in the previous year, the consul and Yvonne become visitants. A candle is kindled in memory of Geoffrey Hurpin. In a supernatural reading, it has been argued by Michael Romer that by reincarnating the consul specifically on the Day of the Dead, Laruelle unwittingly casts a magic burning spell. Now I'd like to say a few words about the Virgin of Guadalupe. The image of the Virgin of Guadalupe is located geographically in Lowry's favorite church, the Basilica de Nuestra Señora de la Soledad, or the Basilica of Our Lady of Solitude in Oaxaca. Visible in the next slide, it is its patron saint, the Virgin de la Soledad, who is also known as Our Lady of Solitude, the Roman Catholic designation for the Blessed Virgin Mary. Represented by the Virgin for those that have nobody with, her effigy is psychogeographically relocated from Oaxaca to Guanajuato in under the volcano. It is an emblem depicted as the consul's yearning. It is an emblem of his faith in the divine. It's a symbol of his hope of finding peace and reconciliation with Yvonne, who has returned to him for just a single day. The Basilica de Nuestra Señora de la Soledad is also a prominent landmark in Dark as the Grave wherein my friend is laid. It is the place where seaborne wilderness eventually discovers the tranquility and harmony which elude the consul in Under the Volcano. In this sequel, the reappearance of the Virgin of Guadalupe leads to the revival of seaborne's faith. Another effigy which has a special importance for Lowry is the dark-skinned figure of the Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe, Our Lady of Guadalupe. Located in Oaxaca's former convent of Santo Domingo, it appears in the next slide. Lowry's friend pins a medal of the Virgin of Guadalupe onto his coat there in 1938 as a way of offering him spiritual protection. This tertiary is the Zapotecan Indian Juan Fernando Marquez. Now I'd like to turn towards exercising the spectres of the past. From the maelstrom of Dark as the Grave wherein my friend is laid to the atonement of La Mordida. Dark as the Grave wherein my friend is laid and its sequel La Mordida were intended to revive phantoms of the past emanating from Under the Volcano. Devised and drafted in 1945 to 1949, Dark as the Grave wherein my friend is laid and La Mordida are based on a prolonged return visit to Mexico by Lowry and his second wife, Marjorie Bonner, in the period November 1945 to May 1946. They provide interfaces between the ethnography of that country and their authors' shamanic attempts to unearth connections between the living and the deceased. Lowry continues his endeavors to track down an elixir of life via voyeuristic shamanic methods with the hope that he will be able to cure humanity's transgressions. He becomes enchanted by Oaxaca. He refers to this city in his letters, which describe it as, and I quote, the most lovely town in the world, and with some of the most lovely people in it, end quote. Immersing in Zapotec heritage, he alludes to two renowned archaeological sites in the valley of Oaxaca. They comprise Mitla and Monte Alban. Dating from 900 BC and 500 BC respectively, the former was famous for its erstwhile religious functions, whereas the latter was once a political cosmic hub. Lowry was obliged to traverse his maelstrom in his eternal quest for atonement with the spirits of the dead. In Dark as the Grave, seaborne wilderness begins to recognize the need to repent for the depths of the past. He synergizes the animist, shamanic, and cosmic energies of the universe, which are manifested in the divine consciousness of Zapotec civilization. In La Mordida remains in a kind of prison, quote, "It is one of emotions, fate, and conscience." Now I'd like to talk about Dark as the Grave Wherein My Friend Is Laid, published posthumously in 1968, and Seaborn's Quest for the Elixir of Life. Dark as the Grave Wherein My Friend Is Laid is connected to its prequel Under the Volcano through the portrait of its hero, Seaborn, who follows in the footsteps of Geoffrey Vermin. Embarking on a return journey from British Columbia to Mexico, Seaborn is determined to exorcise the demons which have been plaguing him since his last visit. Like Lowry, is venturing on a quest in search of the Holy Grail of civilization. At that time, Lowry was still under the influence of Nordahl Grieg, and hence bestows on Seaborn a Norwegian ancestry. Seaborn intends to write a novel entitled The Valley of the Shadow of Death, and hence resumes the consul's odyssey. His pursuit of the meaning of life is evident in the following excerpt from Dark as the Grave. He'd suddenly a glimpse of a flowing like an eternal river. He seemed to see how life flowed into art, how art gives life a form and meaning and flows on into life. Yet life has not stood still. That was what was always forgotten. How life transformed by art sought further meaning through art transformed into life. And now it was as if this flowing, this river changed without appearing to change, becoming a flowing of consciousness, of mind. Having befriended Juan Fernando Martinez, a multilingual indigenous Zapotec, on his first visit to Oaxaca in 1937, he retraces his steps in pursuit of this long-lost blood brother. The son of a man of intellectual persuasion and of a mother who was a pure-blooded Zapotecan, Juan, he envisages, will provide the key to his own metamorphosis. His protective spirit, he concedes, had helped to make this life fruitful. He cherishes memories of him as a messenger for Oaxaca's Aydal Bank, and as a dipsomaniac linguist with the expertise of a chemist, doctor, translator, and adventurer. Martinez is presented as a good angel in Dark as the Grave, depicted as a man of wild courage, humility, and greatness of soul. Is a composite hero who is molded on the real-life Jean Fernando Marquez and Fernando Atonalzin. He's praised by Lowry in his essay Garden of Etla for representing a people possessing a high degree of civilization and cultural genius, and an old Zapotecan religion. Seaborn's American wife, Primrose, is descended from a Catholic burning bishop, as it says in Dark as the Grave. Described as a phoenix, she spurs her husband's spiritual transformation as her guardian angel. She encourages him to attain a harmony with life, having left her fright behind in Eridanus. We are informed that this appellation refers to a constellation south of Orion and the spot they got married on December the 7th, 1940. Eridanus is also the home which they built from the dismantled timbers of the wrecked ship of the same name. On the other hand, Martinez enables Seaborn to be reconciled with death. He is unable to be reunited with his idol, who's become a phantom of the dead. Seaborn yearns to locate his friend's grave. Martinez's final resting place is, it's said, the Crypt of Mirrors. It is located in Cuernavaca's Panteon Municipal La Leona Cemetery, as illustrated in the next slide. Its allure is described as follows. The structure itself was made of millions of tiny mirrors cut in every geometrical shape and fitted together in intricate mosaic patterns, balustrade, pillars down sides like a green temple, even a huge jardiniere containing flowering plants, and in the center of the building a crypt also covered with mirrors. The whole great thing glittered and flashed in the sun and looked like some MGM set for the Ziegfeld Follies. It was meticulously cared for. In an attempt to atone for his past misdemeanors and for the sins of the fallen, Seaborn follows in Lowry's footsteps by venturing on a metaphysical pilgrimage to Mictlan, the underworld of Aztec mythology, to unveil its gods and dead souls. He relates these archaeological finds to a Mexican belief whereby a spirit undertakes a journey through time to the realm of the dead. On his odyssey to unravel the genesis of the indigenous Zapotec civilization, Seaborn visits a high priest palace and then descends through Mittler's prehistoric cruciform tombs to the subterranean column of death. On this transcendental pilgrimage, Seaborn is transported to the Zapotec underworld, for Mittler represents the land of the deceased. Erected above the graves of Zapotec kings, it is depicted as an elaborate burial ground for the rulers and great nobles. Seaborn enjoys the respite of the temple at Mittler, which has been described as the city of the moon. In the romantic setting of the Hotel La Muna on the Playa La Baquila, situated near Puerto Angel on Oaxaca's Pacific coast, is reunited with Primrose, his lunar goddess reborn. They witness an extraordinary sight, for over Ixtacoatl, the moon was in eclipse, which became total. They heard the pure voice of a Mexican singing somewhere on a balcony, as if rejoicing that the world had relinquished its shadow and the moon was with them again. Aspiring to harmony with lunar forces, Primrose has developed a notion of the interrelationship of universal phenomena. She's adept at deducing connections between the seasons and the movements of the stars and constellations as they pass across the night sky. Lowry too was well aware of the importance which Zapotecs and Aztecs placed on worshipping the deities of the sun and the moon. He was captivated by cosmic enigmas and ancient rituals arising from the excavations of the pyramids at Monte Alban and at the 200 BC site of Teotihuacan. This stupendous site contains Mexico's most ancient pyramids, the largest two being dedicated to the sun and moon respectively, as illustrated in the following slides. Here we have the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan, and then the Pyramid of the Moon. In his correspondence, Lowry acknowledges that he did, however, live in Oaxaca for a time among the ruins of Monte Alban and Mittler, which you find mentioned in Donnelly's book on Atlantis, or so he says. Monte Alban translates as White Mountain. It was named after a Mexican tree, the darkened blossoms of which gleam white like the moon at night. Referred to in Darkus the Grave as the great seat of the Zapotecan kings and a kind of lords, it became a considerably powerful political, socio-economic, and spiritual center. It is also significant for its unusual arrow-like astronomical building J, which was enlivened by Zapotec ceremonies which venerated their gods. Constructed with its steps aligned perpendicular to the rising of the star Capella, this edifice has a planetary connection with building O, which is located at Caballito Blanco. It is assumed that Building J served as a calendar temple. As a ceremonial construction, it embodied and gave focus to the long tradition of combined numerology and astronomy that permitted Mesoamericans to create their intricate interlocking calendars, for which the earliest evidence is found in the Valley of Oaxaca. Depicted in the next slide, it is considered to have been an observation post for the viewing of astronomical bodies and a venue where religious ceremonies were held to mark the completion of various time periods. Its iconography is commensurate with that of Quetzalcoatl, the temple of the feathered serpent at Teotihuacan, northeast of Mexico City, which features in the next slide. Named after the Aztec god of the wind, of the ether, and of learning, it is associated with the planet Venus too. Seaborn also resorts to voodoo in Dark as the Grave so that he can attempt to communicate with the spirits of the deceased. Its discipline provides a means to calm his anxieties and to tap the supernatural. It is presented as a way of enabling the living to communicate shamanically with the souls of the dead. The renewal of Seaborn's faith in Dark as the Grave is facilitated by the mediating influence of the dead. It precipitates an acute feeling of something Renaissance, which suggests the need for cultural and spiritual renewal. Seaborn's deliberations have precipitated a radical realization of the mystical experience that suffering had caused him to undergo. He's reminded of the power of Eridanus as the gateway to Hades, which it was believed could be reached by crossing the Styx by ferry. In Greek mythology, this river marks the boundary between the earth, the land of the living, and Hades, the underworld domain of the souls of the dead. In Dark as the Grave, it is depicted as the eternal river of life, river of youth, river of death. Consequently, Seaborn is able to attain a state of harmony with life through his wife and with death through Juan Fernando. Now, one or two words about La Mordida, published in 1996, and the Dostoevskian connection. It was his reading and interpretation of Crime and Punishment which inspired Lowry to devise La Mordida. Another factor was an increasing need to establish a notion of culpability, which was to become an intrinsic feature of La Mordida. Lowry's lingering subconscious feelings of guilt for allegedly aiding and abetting his undergraduate friend, Paul Feta, to commit suicide constrain him to confront his past misdemeanors and to seek atonement for them. Another Dostoevskian link is one where parallels are made with the brothers Karamazov. In La Mordida, however, Seaborn reflects on life as a kind of trial. Seaborn follows the example set by the consul in Under Volcano by aspiring to spiritual regeneration in La Mordida, as he did in Dark as the Grave. La Mordida literally means, of course, the bite or the bribe. It has a deep psychoanalytical importance for Lowry. Beleaguered by memories of his initial visit to Mexico, he finds his second one in 1945 to 46 even more traumatic than the first. It is there that he encounters corrupt immigration officials seeking bribes. His inability to repay an earlier fine or debt and thus to atone for the legacies of the past invokes phantoms which haunt his recollections of the past. La Mordida is narrated through the adventures of its hero, Seaborn Wilderness. Having just left Cuernavaca, he and his partner Primrose are arrested in Acapulco for an unpaid fine of 50 pesos relating to their alleged overstay in Mexico in 1938. They are constrained to lodge a 1,000 peso bond for ostensibly working as writers while they were on tourist visas. Seaborn overhears a conversation which evokes the atmosphere of Under Volcano. It warns them of the potential hazards of being incriminated for espionage activities. They catch the following intimidating accusation. No, they are not writers, they are spiders, and we shoot the spiders in Mexico. Lowry puts in his letters, and I quote, "The voyage into the past is a necessary descent into the hell of self, in which one risks all in the quest for regeneration," end quote. By revisiting bygone eras, bygone events, Seaborn endeavors to atone for them. Caught in the net of someone else's novel, he's become a victim of his own imagination and lives in fear of himself. La Mordida culminates in the salvation of Seaborn, who relishes a heroic vision of absolute joy. He is reborn into a spring sense of creation as a poet or artist. In order to be released from bondage, he must escape psychologically by reversing his journey across the magic border to magic Mexico, accompanied by Primrose. In La Mordida, Seaborn and Primrose have endeavored to face up and make amends for their previous transgressions. Their ingenuous faith in Mexico has unveiled a ray of hope for the eventual salvation of humanity. They are intent on establishing a harmonious relationship with their environment. The closing section of La Mordida portrays Mexico as ancient and eternal, a great Catholic country, a dark and mysterious land. The Chronicle of La Mordida asserts that in Mexico, it's not forbidden for Seaborn to pray for the Virgin of Guadalupe, that is, for the Virgin for those who have nobody with, nor to thank her for his salvation. The narrator explains further that Seaborn's spirit gives rise to the birth of a soul, however mysterious. As a consequence, the wildernesses are depicted as being locked in each other's arms, as if their souls were being born or lulled like children over this flood into an ocean peace. The final setting of La Mordida portrays the moonlit swell of the sea, tranquil and boundless, extending as far as the horizon, beyond which rises the Silver Cross, an allusion to the Southern Cross, as if it were supported by an invisible acolyte's or priest's arm to ward off evil. Thank you very much for listening. Are there any questions? I do actually go into greater detail about the Day of the Dead and Mexico in my book, The Kaleidoscopic Vision of Malcolm Lowry. Are there any questions?
Well, thanks a lot, Nigel. It's always nice to hear you and to see a lot of details and new investigation around all the books of Lowry. I wanted to make a comment, and maybe you can give me your opinion about that. In Dark as the Grave, you quote, art transformed to life, and life also see through the art. And the fact that Under the Volcano, after his publication, created a real brotherhood around the work of Lowry. Would it be something like actually the art transformed to life?
I think art is very important to Lowry, and the surrealism and the surrealist movement and the images as well, and the dreamy world that sometimes he portrays. But I think it's fantastic the way he works. Novels are always very important in his works, and often his heroes writing novels themselves. But actually, it raises the parallels between art and life and consciousness. And Lowry's, of course, supreme consciousness and awareness of the world around him, seeing it perhaps in the world of surrealism or art. But I think it's wonderful to see an appreciation of life and art going hand in hand.
Great, great, great. So, well, maybe in the audience, in the Zoom session, somebody has some question. So if you have some question, feel free to ask Nigel.
Dany, I think I would like to ask something to Nigel, if you let me.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Alberto.
Nigel, Douglas Day said something like Under the Volcano was the biggest religious novel of the 20th century. Mm-hmm. What would you say about that, and how would you relate that to the underworld of the Aztecs and the pre-Hispanic aspects that you have mentioned today?
I think he's always aware of religion in the work. I mean, he early on talks about the number of churches, and he counts the churches and the number of churches, not only the churches, but also the cantinas as well. And I think Lowry's constantly aware of, he has, I think, a spiritual awareness. And I think he's trying actually to indicate the way in which civilization should go, traumatized by the world at war. Why is the world fighting the Second World War? It seems crazy. And I think he's trying to blaze the trail in some way by showing ways in which the world should go, by seeking a great harmony with life, which is he himself, the consul, is unable to actually attain in under the volcano, and needs to go to the forest path of the spring and through the Panama to do so. And I think he's continuously aware of the Pleiades, this link between the skies, the heavens, the cosmos, and the terrestrial, the earth, and the underworld in his reflections of the world, which fits in very well, I think, with the Aztec notions of civilization and the environment as they saw it at the time. Does that answer your question, Alberto? Do you have any thoughts on
Thank you very much, Nigel. I want to say something more. You should know, yesterday we were talking a little bit about this. You should know that a Mexican writer and friend, Oscar Mata, is a teacher at the University of Autonomous of the Mexico City. He Metropolitan University of Mexico. He made a book, he wrote a book, and he named it Malcolm Lowry, San Malcolm de las Cantinas. This is his book, Saint Malcolm of the Cantinas. That's so we consider Under the Volcano a religious novel. And in fact, we Mexicans call Malcolm a saint. We made him a saint of the cantinas. Mm-hmm. How do you like that?
And we need to go in the trail of the cantinas if they still exist. And many of them probably don't exist at the time, but inspired by Malcolm Lowry, perhaps.
Thank you.
Could I ask a question?
Yes, Elsa.
Of course.
Yeah. Thanks, Nigel. That was fascinating. I just wonder whether in his mysticism, Malcolm Lowry is one out on his own, or whether his views are kind of consistent with his peers, because, you know, I'm aware of how people slightly younger than him, slightly older than him, sorry, you know, modernist writers were very interested in mysticism and sometimes had mystical experiences.
Are you thinking, for
In some ways,
instance,
he seems to link back to them. Is that right, or are there others like him around the same age as him?
I think there are a few. I think Yeats was very much interested in mysticism and having spiritual views and values. But I think in many ways, Malcolm Lowry is unique. I think he was influenced. Yeah, was a prolific reader, and his mind worked like a sieve, taking in literature of many languages and different continents. So, but I think he was influenced, as I say, by Yeats, but also, and I think he refers to Yeats in some of his works and also in his letters. But I think he's very much unique in the way he uses mysticism.
Yeah, thanks. I'm actually starting to wonder, this thought has suddenly come to me, might he actually have had an autistic or Asperger's?
That's fascinating. I was thinking
personality, because of his ability to retain so much information. And then when you were talking about numbers, of course, you don't have to be on the Asperger's autism spectrum to be interested in numbers, but that is sometimes a manifestation of that.
I think, and it wasn't really recognized perhaps at the time, and Asperger's, or maybe it was bipolar in some respects as well, perhaps. But it did, I think, have unique talents, and this memory, this memory that was incredible, that he could, like a photocopy, he you know, copied everything. Everything went into his mind and came out years and years later.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't want to classify him or medicalize his writing, but it just is a thought that has occurred to me as you were speaking. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic idea, and it would be good to see a medical reading of, you know, by a doctor or by a surgeon of, for instance, Under the Volcano, to see what, you know, what they could identify. As you've suggested there.
Thanks.
Well, part of if I could make a comment on that, part of the key, I think, to that is William James, The Varieties of Religious Experience, where the chapter from which he takes quite a lot of detail is actually entitled The Sick Soul. So
that's really useful to note that. Thank you very much for pointing out that, Chris.
Yeah, just a comment or maybe a question. Did Lowry know about Mexico before going to Mexico in 1936? Well, I'm asking that because in Ultramarine, he mentioned volcano Popocatépetl. So I was asking if he had some other knowledge about Mexico, or what Popocatépetl is appearing in Ultramarine.
Well, of course, I think he was very familiar with travelers, writers who actually visited Mexico, as I mentioned, D.H. Lawrence, and I think it was quite popular for many people of that time to escape to this land of different culture and civilization. I think in New York, he was very much meeting up with other writers and politicians and union of writers, and he was suggested that he went to Mexico and that would broaden his horizons. So maybe it was in New York that made up his mind eventually, finally, to actually go to Mexico, perhaps.
The reason that he gave is that the alcohol was much cheaper.
I wonder if it's the same today, maybe.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, mezcal is in fashion today around the world, as you may know. So nowadays, mezcal is very expensive. The Rolling Stones, for example, when they came and play one night here in Mexico, like 2 years ago, they say, in the past, we used to drink tequila. Today, we drink mezcal. Imagine Mick Jagger saying that.
Mezcal, or maybe we should be drinking pulque.
Well, pulque is cheaper, but it is in
goes back to
fashion.
the Aztecs, perhaps.
It's in fashion now. Today, the young people, they are drinking a lot of pulque, because I don't know, it's in fashion again, somehow.
May I?
Stephen.
Yeah, I love hearing about the Mexican attitude toward Lowry as a patron saint. That makes two patron saints that I can claim. The other being John Fonte, whose picture is way behind me in my study here, known as the patron saint of Los Angeles writers. But I'm reminded, Nigel, your remarks, thank you very much, as comprehensive and penetrating as always. But I'm reminded of Chris's remark yesterday when Chris referred to, I think Chris thinks too, naive, superficial criticisms of Lowry for being a plagiarist. The quotation that you shared about art becoming life and life becoming art goes straight to that point. And it seems to me that also your story yesterday demonstrates it, how when we live deeply enough in any work of art, it wants to come out again in some kind of resonant way, doesn't it? So that your story takes the notion from under the volcano of it's not possible to live without love and transforms it into something new. Two young people in your part of the world writing letters back and forth. Lowry was endlessly not just recycling, but remaking everything that came into him. And I'm always a bit reluctant to pathologize art or artists, you know, by wondering if they're on the spectrum or, you know, perhaps suffering from Asperger's. I wish I were more like them, huh? So I could take in as much as Malcolm Lowry did and remake it into such eternal art. It's more a comment than a question, but Nigel, you put it up here. Thank you.
No, it's a great idea, I think, Steve. And of course, Malcolm Lowry was continually worried by being accused of being a plagiarist, especially with Burton Rasker wanting to bring a lawsuit against him. But I think it was part of the way his mind was working, and maybe sometimes he didn't realize that it was plagiarism, and he would have, you know, he would have go back the sources and check word for word, and then he tried to alter the words to make sure he wasn't plagiarizing, but he was always very worried about that.
Mm-hmm.
One more question, if it's possible.
Yes,
it's about the cyclic construction of under the volcano. Well, it's obvious that it has pre-Hispanic, how do you say, inspiration, no? But is there some European models of cycling under the volcano, or it's almost pre-Hispanic?
I think it's very filmic. I mean, it allows to reflect on the past and the present and the future and the directions in which the world is going, and whether it's a matter of looking at the Zapotecs and Aztecs at the stars and judging from the stars where the Aztecs were going to and from, and whether it would become the end of the world, and looking for patterns in the sky. But it's fantastic, I think, the way it works in Under the Volcano as as it takes us backwards in time, forwards in time, takes us even to to British Columbia and to Canada as well, hoping for a great life there, and to the Niagara Falls. So I think it's wonderful the way it works in Under Volcano.
All right, thank you. And if I see. And one more comment. If you...
I'm sorry. I had my microphone off. And Nigel, what about what's the meaning of the Pleiades in Under the Volcano? What did Lowry, for example, believed in something like extraterrestrial intelligence or something? Or what is the meaning of the Pleiades in the novel?
I think it's probably looking back at the Aztecs and how they saw the Pleiades and looked to the Pleiades for signs or a symbol where the world was going and the civilization was going. And I think Lowry was aware of that through his reading. So I think it was grounded in, historical reading, historical facts, in anthropology, in trying to get into the Aztec mind of how they saw civilization and how they were influenced by the stars and by the Pleiades.
All right. Thank you very much, Nigel.
You're welcome.
Does anybody has any other question? Or do you want to add something? Anything, Nigel, our friend?
Yeah. I will have a question. Let me find it. Where is Escondió? All right. Yeah. Let me see. Yeah, I got it. It's easier. Malcolm was very learned in a way. He wanted to pass that knowledge on to his readers, I guess. Do you think that type of erudition can be given today with so much information and maybe too much information? I mean, we are in the internet world, so you can find all the kind of information you need, you want. But as we see, Lowry is has a very high erudition.
Mm-hmm. I think, of course, reading a page, a line, a sentence from Lowry, where does one start? Where does one stop? We go on for pages and pages. And I think as today in our modern technological computer environment, we can surf the internet in Lowry, deciding on which pages we click on, which links we click on, which directions we want to go, whether we want to look at Mexico and Aztec Zapotec culture, or whether we want to delve into the Kabbalah, or whether we want to go into Canada. Imagine Lowry building a shack, walking on the forest path to the spring, going back into his psychology, or taking us back to Liverpool, to the wonderful place of Liverpool, which he was, or rather, he much preferred, I think, perhaps the Wirral, or China, or the Far East. So we can go in, I think there's something for everyone in Lowry, and we can go in whichever direction we want to focus on.
All right. So it was like he wanted maybe to share his knowledge with everybody. And
I think that the Lowry is open for research, and I think there's far more to go. And within Ballast to the White Sea and the wonderful publication of the scholarly editions opens up from the Lowry research world to far more, to even more erudition and research. It's a wonderful place to be at the moment, I think, Lowry Studies.
Yeah, it's very great because as we see from all around the world, we can understand each other and work in the same way, I would say.
And I discovered quite a growing interest in Japan in Malcolm Lowry studies and locating experts in different countries. In France, of course, there's a very big contingent of lecturers, professors researching into Malcolm Lowry. So I think we need to spread the word even further across the world. But a wonderful occasion to do that today, I think, on the internet, on Facebook. Hopefully we'll have viewers from throughout the world for this series of this program series of lectures, seminars on Lowry.
Nigel, thanks to you and your work, and thanks to Chris and his work and others, there's enough for new scholars to just take off and go places we can only imagine at this point.
Thank you.
Okay, but very nice. So about the program, we will have, we were supposed to have Sherrill Grace interviewing by Alberto.
Dany Boy, por favor. Dany Boy,
¿Sí?
me estoy comunicando en este momento con la doctora Sherrill Grace. Me dice que en un minuto, en unos segundos se conecta. Entonces vamos nada más, si quieres, no sé si quieren una pregunta más con Nigel en lo mientras, en un segundo, ya nos estamos conectando en segundos.
Perfecto, perfecto. Sí, pues aquí seguimos y nos manda saludos Ludovic, un amigo de Cuernavaca que está siguiendo el coloquio y también se interesa mucho en Malcolm Lowry y ha tenido la oportunidad de recibir a gente, visitantes que llegan hasta Cuernavaca para visitar y seguir los pasos de Lowry. Entonces, saludos, Ludovic, y qué bueno que estés sintonizando el coloquio. Oscar también nos está viendo. Saludos, maestro, miembro de la Fundación Malcolm Lowry, como ya lo comentamos. Y le puedo decir que al final del evento, si se quiere conectar a la sesión de Zoom, para que hagamos el brindis con mezcal juntos, como habíamos previsto.
Ya Sherrill tiene el link para que entre a la sesión de Zoom, entonces en cualquier momento se va a unir a nuestra sesión para que estemos atentos en cuanto ya ingrese, ya para empezar la entrevista que vamos a tener con la doctora Sherrill Grace. En cualquier momento se va a conectar porque ya le hicimos llegar pues la información. Parece que hubo ahí un cruce de canales, pero ya debe estar a punto de conectarse.
Muy bien, mientras tanto, pues les leo algunos comentarios que vemos en Facebook. Brian Biggs, que estuvo con nosotros ayer, nos dice, Brian Biggs, thanks Nigel, very stimulating talk. Good to hear of Lowry to continually evolving, curious internationalists. John Ayat, thank you, Nigel. And Glenn Woodworth, thanks for the good talks, Nigel. I greatly enjoy it.
Hello, Glenn. Pleased to hear from you.
Y después, entonces, de la entrevista a Sherrill Grace, les presentaremos el libro, la síntesis del coloquio que se llevó a cabo el año pasado en Lisboa, que es la publicación de los ensayos de las personas que participaron. Entre otras, participó Nigel Foxcroft, que está aquí con nosotros hoy, Daniel Lowry de Francia, Mercedes Pedrero, que nos hizo una muy buena plática sobre el simbolismo en el Día de Muertos en México. También participaron varios poetas de Lisboa. Y también Stephen Cooper participó presentando y hablando de su libro An Ofrenda to Malcolm Lowry, To Under the Volcano. Entonces, ese trabajo editorial estará listo en enero y también está acompañado de un DVD y esperemos en un futuro poder también editar el DVD y poder compartir en internet algunas de las pláticas que se llevaron a cabo en Lisboa el año pasado, pero toda esa información la pueden encontrar en nuestra página de Facebook y también en nuestro canal de YouTube y en el blog que empezamos en 2007, que se llama la Fundación Malcolm Lowry. Ahí lo buscan en internet y pueden encontrar fácilmente el blog. Well, for my or English friends and English speakers, I just was saying that we will reach a book about the colloque of last year in Lisboa, and then in this book we'll have contribution from Nigel, from the French Daniel Lowers writer, from Stephen Cooper, from poets of Lisbon, and so on. So this book will be ready in January or February. Excellent. And there's also a DVD. So we'll try to edit the DVD to have the videos of the talk of last year and be able to share this talk on internet too. So on the YouTube channel of the Foundation Malcolm Lowry, and also in the blog of the Foundation Malcolm Lowry.
Thanks to you, thanks to Marcelo, especially.
Pues Marcelo, ¿por qué no empezamos con lo del DVD mientras se sintoniza Sherrill y luego pasamos a Sherrill?
Yo creo que sí vamos a tener que pasar al siguiente evento, quiero decir al número de la presentación del libro de Lisboa, porque sí, ya no sé qué problema está sucediendo con la doctora Sherrill Grace, pero no está conectada. Entonces, si quieren, avanzamos, Dani.
Sí, claro. Pues Marcelo, te dejamos encargado, te damos la palabra.
Gracias. Aquí. Bom, este pequeno vídeo que acabamos de ver resume de alguma forma o que foi o colóquio do ano passado realizado em Lisboa. Esse colóquio deu origem a um livro que reúne as comunicações que foram apresentadas. Foi feito também um DVD que gravou as sessões, todas as sessões dos 2 dias do colóquio, e que está feito. O livro está concluído também, a qualquer momento será impresso, ainda não foi por questões técnicas que têm que ver com a pandemia que atravessamos, e esperamos nos próximos meses, no início de 2021, que o livro esteja disponível. É importante dizer que quer o livro, quer o DVD, só foi possível com o apoio do Grupo Desportivo e Cultural do Banco de Portugal, que nos apoiou, nós, a Fundação Malcolm Lowry, na realização deste evento, nomeadamente na feitura deste DVD e deste livro, e entre outros aspectos mais logísticos e operacionais. Teremos todo o prazer em partilhar o livro e o DVD mais à frente nos nossos canais, no Facebook, no YouTube, e será um prazer, porque só assim estas coisas têm sentido se forem divulgadas por todos aqueles que se interessam pela obra de Malcolm Lowry. Obrigado. Dany. ¿Sí puedes seguir?
Sí, bueno, pues excelente, sí, pues siempre es bueno tener publicaciones circulando acerca de Malcolm Lowry. También este libro va a ser disponible cuando esté publicado, pues comuníquense con nosotros y para que les hagamos llegar ejemplares. And yeah, when the book will be ready, we will notify you, and we'll be able to send some copies where they will be needed. Y aprovecho para mandar un saludo también a nuestro queridísimo Víctor Goches, un gran pintor radicado aquí en Cuernavaca, fan también de Malcolm Lowry, y manda un saludo a todos los laurianos del mundo. Víctor es un buen cobrador de la cartonera y pues ha tenido la oportunidad de pintar muchísimas portadas para nosotros y maravillosas portadas para la edición que se llama Sobre Lowry, que es una colección de ensayos que publicamos aquí en Cuernavaca en 2012, y de la cual ya hicimos 3 ediciones. Y también en 2016 con Víctor hicimos un mural, diría, sobre cartón grande, como de 3 metros por 2, y Víctor coordinó todo el trabajo de ese mural en homenaje a Malcolm Lowry. Y ese mural también pueden ver fotos en el blog de la Fundación Malcolm Lowry, y quizás compartemos una foto de ese mural en esos días en la página Facebook de la Fundación.
Dany, perdón, Sherrill me dice que está ya tratando de entrar en la sesión de Zoom. A ver si puedes corroborarlo ya para que empecemos con la entrevista. No sé si la tienes por ahí, ya dice que está tratando de entrar.
Déjame checar eso.
Dice que incluso nos puede escuchar y todo, pero que no sabe cómo entrar directamente a la sesión. Supongo que debe estar ahí en la espera, ¿no?
No, normalmente se entra directamente. ¿Sabes qué? Póngale que se desconecta y que se vuelva a conectar. O quizás no tiene el micrófono o no le pico. ¿Sabes qué? No, cuando te conectas tienes que decir que entras a través de la compu, del audio de la compu.
Ya le expliqué, esperemos que sí se conecte. En lo mientras, ¿puedo hacer un comentario, Dany?
Claro, claro, adelante.
Mire, ayer estábamos platicando con el maestro Hernán Lara Zavala, de la Facultad de Filosofía y Letras de la UNAM, nos hizo una presentación comparativa sobre la obra de Juan Rulfo, básicamente Pedro Páramo y Bajo el Volcán. Una conferencia muy interesante. Para los que no la pudieron escuchar, está aquí en la página de Facebook, la pueden ver en cualquier momento que ustedes quieran. Pero ya no pudimos comentar, más bien se nos olvidó comentar algo muy interesante, esta situación de que el camarada Óscar Menéndez fue jefe directo en el Instituto Nacional de Antropología de Juan Rulfo. Y, por ejemplo, Hernán Lara comentaba algo muy interesante, decía que difícilmente Juan Rulfo podría haber leído a Malcolm Lowry. Bajo el Volcán se publicó, bueno, en español hasta 1964, si no mal recuerdo, pero en inglés ya se había publicado desde el 47. Entonces, es posible que Juan Rulfo hubiera leído a Lowry antes de escribir Pedro Páramo, pero ahí habría que ver. Óscar Menéndez, yo en alguna ocasión le pregunté y me decía que él creía que sí, efectivamente, Juan Rulfo había leído Bajo el Volcán. Entonces, habría que ver. Me parece que Óscar no está ahorita, pero ojalá que nos haga llegar ese comentario, ¿no? O si lo tenemos por ahí en el Face, no sé si nos pueda comentar algo, Óscar, al respecto. Y si no, bueno, para los amigos de Inglaterra, porque todavía no veo que no se ha conectado, veo que no se ha conectado Sherrill. Juan Rulfo, the writer, Mexican writer, our friend Oscar Menendez was his boss where they used to work in the 60s. And Oscar Menendez once told us that Juan Rulfo might have read Under the Volcano. And while that was a very interesting comment of our friend Oscar Menendez, who I'm not sure if he's following us right now, but I would love him to talk us a little bit about Juan Rulfo and the influence of Lowry on him, on his work. Pues parece que no, ¿verdad, Dany? ¿No se logró conectar?
No, pero ¿sabes qué? Mándame su correo y voy a intentar mandarle la invitación vía correo. Pero si quieres, mientras les vamos a enseñar el video del pequeño video que hicimos del coloquio del año pasado.
Sí.
Ahorita lo voy a sintonizar.
Uh-huh.
Quando o vento maldoía e o céu mais prolongava, namorada de um veleiro, no peito do marinheiro, que estando triste cantava. Que estando triste cantava. tamanha, meu chão, meu monte, meu vale, de folhas, flores, frutas de ouro. Vê se vês terras de Espanha, areias de Portugal, olhar ceguinho de choro. Na boca de marinheiro, frágil barco veleiro, morrendo a canção magoada. Diz o pungir dos desejos, do lábio a queimar de beijos, que beijam o ar e mais nada. Que beijam o ar e mais nada. Mãe, adeus, adeus, Maria, guarda bem teu sentido, que aqui te faço uma ajuda, que eu te levo à sacristia, ou foi Deus que foi servido, dá-me no mar sepultura. Loreis que embora outro dia, quando o vento não engolia e o céu mar prolongava, na proa do outro veleiro velava outro marinheiro, que estando triste cantava, que estando triste cantava.
Dany.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Cheryl.
Hi, Sherrill. Welcome.
Used a completely different link this time and went straight in the usual Zoom manner. I don't know whether the Facebook one was a mystery. Hi, Chris. Hi, everyone. Sorry for the delay.
Thank you very much, Sherrill, for being with us today. We are very pleased to have you here with us. It's an honor, a great honor to have you here for the second time on our International Colloquium this year, 2020. Pandemonium, called Pandemonium, the greatest day of the dead of the century. Thank you very much, Sherrill. I'm going to introduce you to the audience. La doctora Sherrill Grace, compañeros, la doctora Sherrill Grace es una de las especialistas más importantes a nivel mundial sobre la vida y la obra de Malcolm Lowry. Ella es profesora catedrática de la Universidad de British Columbia, Vancouver, Canadá. Estudió en la Universidad de McGill University, en el 74 se graduó, tiene múltiples premios recibidos tanto en Canadá como a nivel mundial. Ella ha dado conferencias en todo el mundo, en China, en Japón, en muchos países de Europa, Latinoamérica, en México también hemos tenido su presencia. Le agradecemos mucho que esté hoy con nosotros. Ella tiene varios libros sobre Malcolm Lowry. Ella se dedicó a transcribir las cartas que Malcolm Lowry tiene en la Universidad de British Columbia, en los archivos. Hay una colección especial de archivos de Malcolm Lowry, borradores, cartas. Ella se ha dedicado a la transcripción justamente de estas cartas, de estos documentos, y tiene varias publicaciones acerca de estas cartas. Se llama Sursum Corda, The Collected Letters of Malcolm Lowry. También tiene The Voyage That Never Ends, una colección de ensayos sobre precisamente Malcolm Lowry. Entonces, la doctora Sherrill Grace pues tiene un largo historial, una larga biografía sobre el escritor inglés y otros autores que también ella pues se ha dedicado a investigar. Le agradecemos mucho pues su presencia hoy con nosotros y vamos a hacerle una entrevista. Sherrill, once again, we are very happy to have you with us today. We are going to have a short interview, and we are going to ask you some questions if you mind. Please, Sherrill, and thank you very much. The first question, yes.
Let me first say, Alberto, how
Yes,
lovely
please.
it is to see you after so many years. I'm sorry that the pandemic means we can't actually come to Mexico and all be together. I have such happy memories of my many trips to Mexico. Anyway, thank you for the introduction, and it's great to see you.
It's great to see you again, Sherrill. You were with us in 2002, the first international colloquium. Now we are in the 15th international colloquium, Malcolm Lowry, and we are very happy and pleased and honored to have you with us today. Sherrill, would you please tell us, how did you first discover Lowry's work? Was it a kind of homework for the university, or how did you meet him? Why did you like him that much, Under the Volcano book? Please.
It wasn't homework, actually, Alberto. I had been doing a course on James Joyce with a specialist in language, actually from the German department at McGill. And I remember him saying to me, oh, a book you should read is Under the Volcano. Well, I was going to say, in those days, I would make lists of books I had to read, but I'm still making lists. I've got them all over the place. It's just that now they're on sticky notes. And that summer, once I finished my coursework, I read Under the Volcano. And I think two things happened. One, having studied Joyce intensely, I had developed some tools for reading a complex fiction, like narrative. And so I felt at home with Under the Volcano, even as a graduate student, and had no trouble. And then there was a second thing, and it also has to do with that graduate seminar on Joyce. Lowry meant so much more to me, and Joyce did not. And I know we have some Joyce lovers amongst us here, but I don't count myself one of them. I learned how to study complex literature working on Joyce, but Lowry provided a richness of human feeling and human connection, and political information, socio-political information, cultural information that was just very impressive in Under the Volcano. That was my kind of book. That's all I can say. And it's been my kind of book for the rest of my life. The biography I've just published on Timothy Finley. Finley wrote those kinds of books. They're complex narratives, but they are full of history and politics and intellectual debate, which, along with the beautiful use of the English language, but that's where I started. Summer reading.
Thank you very much, Sherrill. Le pregunto a la doctora Sherrill Grace cómo descubrió Malcolm Lowry, cómo empezó a leer Bajo el Volcán. Nos dice que ella estaba estudiando muy profundamente a James Joyce, pero pues le recomendaron la lectura de Malcolm Lowry y le fue mucho más significante, mucho más interesante y mucho más cercano, que es lo que nos pasa a nosotros los mexicanos. También los mexicanos nos sentimos muy identificados con la lectura de Bajo el Volcán, y sobre todo los que pues amamos Cuernavaca y vivimos en México. y también nos sentimos muy identificados con esto. Sherrill, Joyce and Lowry. James Joyce has a short story, famous book, The Dead. How do you think it has somehow a relationship with Under the Volcano, The Dead?
I hadn't thought of that before. I don't know. It's been a long time since I read that story. That's actually a very good Joyce story, in my view. I like his stories better than Ulysses or Finnegan's Wake, but I don't know. I can't answer it. I haven't thought about that, and I haven't read the story in decades. So somebody else will have to dig into that. That might be.
It's a difficult question. Would you please explain what Larry called the voyage that never ends? Was it a series of 3 books, 7 books, 9 books? It seems that at some point it was only a collection of 3 books, no? But at the end it expanded a lot. Pregunto a Sherrill Grace si nos comenta sobre el viaje que nunca termina, este proyecto de Malcolm Lowry, que eran una serie de libros, parece que primero eran 3 y luego se fue expandiendo a 7, a 9. Es la pregunta que hacemos para la doctora Sherrill Grace. Please, Sherrill.
I guess I'd have to say that Lowry had a obsession, propensity, a need, an obsession with constantly adding things in. And you see this in his manuscripts. He never wanted to cut things out when he was revising. He always wanted to add things in. And often he would take something he'd been told he should cut out and he'd stuff it in somewhere else, and then work it through. And I think that was part of what happened with his novels. He started thinking, oh, well, a trilogy, will do. And then the more he got into the trilogy, the more he had to say. And the more he had to say, the more he wanted to say, which meant another one and another one and another one and another one. And psychologically, one could come up with some theorizing as to what that said about him and his personality. But all I can say is that, because I'm not his biographer, that one thing led to another with him in a really interesting way. He had a mind that worked laterally. This way, not this way. It was always a mind working that way, and therefore bringing in any new experience, any new reading, any new newspaper headlines. These would then become something more he needed to talk about, needed to write about. But I think you have others with you who can probably answer that question as well, if not better than I can. I called this book The Voyage That Never Ends, because when I was working in the manuscripts in the archives as a graduate student, this is what I kept seeing. I kept seeing how he was working on this ever expanding notion of 3 and then 7, which was of course another important number, both symbolically and on many levels. The numbers 3 and the number 7 were numbers that, and he loved various approaches to numbers and numerology and so on. So numbers were important too, but then it spins off and brings in more information. I find that fascinating and immensely creative, but hard to control. And I think it was the controlling of that would be one of his greatest challenges.
Nos contesta la doctora Sherrill Grace que Malcolm empezó a escribir originalmente 3 libros, una serie de 3 libros, pero como era un escritor, digamos, compulsivo, pues continuaba escribiendo y cada vez una cosa lo llevaba a otra, una cosa a otra, y entonces ya tenía un proyecto de pronto pues muy grande de una colección de libros de alrededor de 9 libros. Entonces, bueno, su personalidad era así, ¿no? Él siempre estaba buscando más y se expandía. Al final, pues no lo terminó, pero bueno, su intención era continuar escribiendo. Sherrill, would you please explain this, what he calls the interdimensional situation? When Lowry lived in his second voyage to Mexico in 1946, when he received a letter for publishing The Volcano by precisely the postman who appears as a character in Under the Volcano is the same person, the real person who gives him the letter announcing the publishing of Under the Volcano. Suddenly he felt as if he was living in his own book, in his own novel, because he was living in the house of Jacques Larrel, another character in the novel, there in Cuernavaca, which is nowadays the Hotel Bajo el Volcán. Would you please explain a little bit of this situation, how strange it was? Le pregunto a Sherrill sobre la vida de Lowry cuando él regresó a México en el 46. Vivió en lo que hoy es el Hotel Bajo el Volcán, pero ese Hotel Bajo el Volcán era justo la casa de otro de sus personajes de Bajo el Volcán, que se llamaba Jacques Larrel. Entonces, de pronto, en esa casa que era parte de su novela, llega el cartero, el mismo cartero que él se basó para hacer el personaje en su libro Bajo el Volcán, llega el cartero para entregarle una carta en la cual decía que ya se iba a publicar su libro Bajo el Volcán en Inglaterra. Entonces esta situación fue muy extraña porque Malcolm Lowry de pronto sentía que estaba viviendo en su propia obra, en su propia novela, en su propio libro. Fue una situación fantástica. Sherrill, would you please comment a little bit about it?
I'll comment a little bit by saying that, muy bien, you have explained what happened. Isn't it? It's such a cool idea. It's other writers have had this same thing going on. I mean, I've just finished reading a contemporary Spanish writer, Zafón, from Barcelona, and The Shadow of the Wind, and other writers too. But that's an absolutely fascinating thing, to feel that you're living inside the book you've already written. And I think that is exactly what you've said it. And that phrase, interdimensional situation, it means two things: being inside the book and being the book inside of him. So inside him, he feels he's living inside his own book. And that then I think we need to link with this business I mentioned a moment ago, where he would take, as we all know, we've studied him, so he would take something in the news, something he'd read in a book, he had this phenomenal memory, something he'd seen on the street, a person, whatever, a headline, a newspaper headline, whatever, and find a way of working that into his fiction. In other words, he would recreate actual things and moments and scenes and people from the real world, he would recreate in his fiction. So there's a sense in which, I don't know if it's been explored sufficiently by scholars, though I think it's frequently been commented upon, this permeable wall between the inner and the outer, between the fictional and the real, and how these two can slide one into the other. It's an interesting artistic, creative, psychological phenomenon. He doesn't see a fixed wall or boundary between self and other, but always wants to cross that boundary, or feels that boundary is crossing into him. And he's creating out of that particular perspective. So I think you explained it very well. So I'm just to add that comment to what you've said so well.
Thank you very much, Sherrill. Nos comenta la doctora Sherrill Grace que efectivamente es muy interesante esta mezcla que sucede en la vida de Lowry, en cual se empiezan a cruzar su ficción y su vida real. Es un momento de su vida realmente muy interesante, porque desde la parte de vista, del punto de vista artístico, Malcolm Lowry, digamos que mezclaba su vida y su obra, y a partir de ese momento su obra se seguía construyendo y se seguía expandiendo a partir de la integración de su ficción su vida real, que bueno, es uno de los aspectos más interesantes, ¿no? De la vida del profeta Michael Lowry. Do you think, Larry, Sherrill, do you think that he could have finished this project of the voyage that never ends? And how long would have that taken him? And how fantastic would have been to have it with us today. Le pregunto a Sherrill cómo si era posible que Malcolm Lowry hubiera terminado realmente este proyecto tan grande llamado El viaje que nunca termina. Go on, please, Sherrill.
No. No. In
Really?
one word,
Completely.
no, I don't think he could have. It would keep on going as long as he was alive and well enough, to think and to write and to process the world around him. Would it have been fantastic to have it finished? If it could have been finished, of course it would. It would have made his place, I suppose, in 20th century English language literature even greater than it is. But I think my answer to that question would be no.
Sí, Sharon nos dice que muy difícilmente, más bien no podría haber terminado Malcolm Lowry su viaje que nunca termina por la complejidad que implica y además por los problemas que ya tenía el escritor. La siguiente pregunta le voy a hacer a Sherrill es ¿qué recomendaría ella para la traducción de La Mordida? Este libro, La Mordida, es un libro póstumo que se publicó recientemente y que habla también sobre su viaje a México, un viaje que era realmente fatal, casi fue asesinado en México. Pero bueno, Sherrill, what would you recommend for the publication and the translation of La Mordida into Spanish for the Spanish-speaking audience? Do you recommend it to translate it as it is, the book, as with all the annotations and all the same edition as they made some scholars in the United States, or do you recommend it to translate it as for us to be read as a storyline, no, as a straight storyline? How would you recommend us to do with the translation of La Mordida, please?
I've thought about that question since you gave it to me, Alberto. Here, okay. Who would the audience be for a translation into Spanish of anything from La Mordida? Who would the audience be? Who would the publisher be? How would the book be marketed? In other words, what kind of a book would a publisher be interested in and readers be interested in? If it's a scholarly press and a scholarly audience in the Spanish-speaking world, then it would be Pat's entire scholarly edition. If not that, then my honest answer would be, as I said, actually, I went back and looked at what I had said in The Voyage That Never Ends, my book. It's in fragments. It is a very, very unfinished work. I don't think that in a trade book sense, it would do anything for Lowry's reputation as an artist. In the scholarly world, that's a different audience and a different approach and a different kind of book. So you would need to be asking those kinds of very practical questions. As we know, Dark as the Grave was edited and published. October Ferry, the same. To some extent, though much less, Hear Us, O Lord. And La Mordida in its raw state, manuscript state, is a mess. So anyway, that's the best I can answer you. A trade book, I doubt it. Cut back to a narrative somehow. A scholarly edition with the right publisher, that's another kind of book.
Gracias, Sherrill. Nos dice que es complicado porque depende del público al que va dirigido el libro. Si se va a dirigir este libro para pues especialistas, pues tendría que traducirse tal como está. Y si fuese para un público más general, bueno, pues se podrían hacer a lo mejor algunas ediciones para que fuera más, digamos, un libro pues más disfrutable, ¿no? Más leíble, más como historia, ¿no? Pero pues que no considera que realmente ayude mucho a la reputación de Malcolm Lowry, porque el libro está, digamos, en una etapa, La mordida está en una etapa no terminada, ¿no? Es una obra en progreso. La mordida era una obra en progreso y así se quedó. Entonces, pues, bueno, sería interesante ver cómo se puede hacer esta traducción de La mordida. Well, we will never know exactly how Larry died, ¿no? No sabemos exactamente cómo fue la muerte de Larry, pero le voy a preguntar a Sherrill cuál es su opinión personal acerca de su muerte. Do you think, Sherrill, that Larry's death was an accident or was something different?
I think it was probably an accident. You're really asking, did Marjorie do him in? Had she had enough and couldn't take any more? And of course, I can't answer that. I have no idea. It was a very difficult time. I think it was an accident. We'll never know.
Thank you, Sherrill. Bueno, nos dice que ella cree que es un accidente, ¿no? Se trató seguramente de un accidente y pues que realmente no tenemos a ciencia cierta, ¿no? O no podemos saber a ciencia cierta lo que sucedió. Le voy a preguntar a Sherrill si cree que todavía se puede hacer una mejor película sobre Bajo el Volcán. Do you think it's possible to make a better film of the volcano?
Yes.
Who would you recommend to?
Oh, who? It should have been Benoit, of course. But I don't know right now who I would say. I mean, Herzog would do you'd get different, whoever was doing it, you'd get a different volcano. But I'd love to see another film version. Albert Finney got tiresome for me in Volcano. So yeah, no, I would love to see another film, but I don't know who.
Do you know, Sherrill, that I think it was during the 60s, there was a very famous filmmaker in Mexico who was trying to make a film of the volcano, Luis Buñuel. Luis Buñuel was...
Well, of course, yes.
But I think Marjorie Lowry, well, they didn't have an agreement, no, a clear agreement to
That's right. It should have been Manuel. Yeah.
And I think Gabriel Garcia Marquez was working on the project.
Really?
It was a shame. Yes, he was making the screen film. But well, it is a shame that they didn't could finish.
Yeah.
They couldn't finish the project. Well, would you say? Bueno, le comenté a Sherrill que en los 60s Luis Buñuel estaba tratando de hacer la película de Bajo el Volcán. De hecho, Gabriel García Márquez con otros escritores estaban ya trabajando en el guión. Desgraciadamente no hubo acuerdo con Marjorie, con la esposa, viuda de Lowry, y por esta situación no se pudo terminar con el proyecto de la película. Pero en fin, hubiésemos tenido, creo que un maravilloso proyecto con Luis Buñuel. Y le hubiera quedado como anillo al dedo, ¿no? Bueno, le voy a preguntar a Sherrill qué opina de que pues no hay mucho interés en México de publicar La mordida. Sherrill, what do you think if I told you that there is no interest in Mexico to publishing La mordida?
I guess I would have to ask, why should there be an interest in Mexico for publishing a translation of La Mordida? Why should there be? Who would the audience be? It comes back to the question of translating it, you know. Only you in Mexico, it seems to me, would be able really to answer that question. I don't have an opinion on why no one would want to in Mexico, except to say that from practical perspective, a publisher would say, well, who's the market for this? Who's the audience for this? You know, and can we make money? You know, it's a business, right? So I don't know. I don't really have an opinion on that one, Alberto.
I understand. Nos dice Sherrill que pues no ve como un gran negocio editorial la publicación de La Mordida y por lo tanto es difícil que haya interesados, ¿no? En la publicación de este libro. Bueno, I think you, Sherrill, wanted to share us a couple of letters from that Lowry wrote to his friend Juan Fernando Marquez or Juan Fernando Tonaltzin. There are two versions of his name. Would you proceed, please?
Yes, I'll read one, and I think maybe we should stop there because everything got delayed with the technology. This
Sure.
Letter to Juan Fernando Marquez is in volume 1, and it was written roughly December 1937. It was in manuscript with his papers. There was another one later on, but this one I thought was the most eloquent of them. Juan, I am here because there is much hostility in my hotel. I am trying to do some work here, but my life is so circumscribed by your detectives who walk up and down the street and stand at the street corner as though there was nothing better to do than to spy on a man who is unable to do anything anyway and never had any intention of doing anything but be gay and love and help. Help was necessary that I am rapidly losing my mind. It is not drink that does this, but Oaxaca. Do you wish me to leave with the impression that Oaxaca, the most lovely town in the world, and with some of the most lovely people in it, is a town consisting entirely of spies and dogs? This is unfair to me, but it is a hell of a sight unfairer to Oaxaca. The English are sufficiently stupid, but the stupidity and hypocrisy of your detectives and the motives which are behind their little eternal spying Tom activities completely transcend any criminality and stupidity I have ever encountered anywhere in the world. Have these guys nothing better to do than to watch a man who merely wants to write poetry? As if I had not enough troubles on my mind. I do profoundly think that the Oaxaqueños are among the most courteous, sweetly gracious, and fundamentally decent people in the entire world. I think this too of your boss and of yourself and of this lovely town. However, the whole damn thing is being raised to an insane state of suspicion. People even camp outside my bloody door to see if I'm drinking inside. And of course, I probably am, because it's so difficult or becoming so difficult to drink outside. If I do not drink now a certain amount, there seems no possible doubt that I shall have a nervous breakdown. If I have that, equally, I shall find myself in that goddamn jail to which I seem to be progressing almost geometrically. And as you know, when one goes there sober, one comes out drunk. It seems almost that I have a kind of fixation on the place because, like the novelist Dostoevsky, I have practically a pathological sympathy for those who do what others think is wrong and get into the shit. What I have absolutely no sympathy with is the legislator, the man who seeks for his own profit to exploit the weaknesses of those who are unable to help themselves, and then to fasten some moral superscription upon it. This I loathe so much that I cannot conceivably explain how much it is, nor for that matter has any man a right to legislate upon a person who has paid through the nose as I have, who has his house robbed, his wife taken away, in short, everything taken away, simply to be in Mexico. For his own goddamn stupid political reactionary reasons, when anyhow it is only a country that he himself, I mean the legislator, has criminally stolen. You know what I mean, of course it is true. Montezuma, not the beer, may not have been much better than Cortés or Alvarado. However, this is another story. Let's end there. That's the end of that.
Fantastic.
Of that holograph letter. And it takes me back into some of your questions because it just goes on and on. He keeps adding another clause, adding another sentence. You have to catch your breath. It is also, of course, totally hysterical and self-pitying. But absolutely Malcolm Lowry.
Yes, his personality. Sherrill nos acaba de leer una carta que le escribió Malcolm Lowry a Juan Fernando Márquez, su gran amigo oaxaqueño, mientras estaba en Oaxaca, y se está quejando totalmente, de una manera bastante histérica, de que lo está persiguiendo la policía. Recuerden que lo encarcelaron en un par de ocasiones estando en Oaxaca por estar borracho y por no tener pasaporte. Entonces se está quejando de que lo están espiando. Dice, ¿cómo puede la policía espiar a un poeta, a una persona que lo único que quiere hacer es escribir poesía? Y bueno, parece que está en su cuarto de hotel pues quejándose de esta situación. Dice que Oaxaca es el pueblo más hermoso del mundo, cosa que estamos totalmente de acuerdo, ¿verdad? Oaxaca es un lugar increíble. Bueno, pues no resta más que agradecer infinitamente a la doctora Sherrill Grace su participación con nosotros en este 15º Coloquio Internacional con Lowry. No sé, Dany, si tengamos una pregunta o alguna participación, a ver si todavía Sherrill nos da un minuto más.
Pues del
Dany,
Facebook no hay preguntas. Alex manda saludos y quizás podemos preguntar a nuestros amigos aquí en la sesión de Zoom si quieren hacer algún comentario o una pregunta a Sherrill.
Our friends here on the Zoom platform, do you have any questions for Sherrill Grace, Dr. Sherrill Grace?
I've got something, Alberto, if I can.
Please, Chris, if you Sherrill have a minute, please.
It's more of a comment than a question, but it goes back to what Sherrill was talking about with the relationship, or the question you asked about, did Lowry know the dead? And I suspect he knew of the dead, but he didn't really make much use of it. There is a wonderful story about somebody that came to borrow a copy of Ulysses from him and returned it the next day with the comment, very good. And Lowry obviously had read Ulysses, and the influences of that can be felt here and there, but I don't think he knew Joyce intimately. But the rather interesting connection is a wonderful writer of short stories, of course, Catherine Ann Porter, who spent a lot of time in Mexico and who acknowledged Joyce's The Dead as a kind of defining influence upon her own work. And she has a short story called The Jilting of Granny Weatherall, which is almost like a retelling of The Dead. If anything, I think it's a better story than Joyce's The Dead, which is as good as you can get. But the interesting one with Catherine Ann Porter is Flowering Judas, because that is set in Cuernavaca, and it has many of the features that are talked about in Under the Volcano, the barranca and lots of other things. And so that, I think, is an interesting indirect connection between Lowry and Joyce by means of Catherine Ann Porter. And certainly, I think she's a wonderful, wonderful writer of short stories, and that Mexican influence is very, very pronounced. I'm not sure, again, whether Lowry read her, and if he did, he does not seem to have been greatly influenced by her. But after all, it is, as I say, the unimaginable library of the dead, where all these things are interconnected for us.
Interestingly, I think a very fine film of the dead was made, his last film, by John Huston.
Yes,
also,
that's good. That's a good film.
It was much better than Under the Volcano.
Under the Volcano. And I have a soft spot for that film, for at least the intentions and the attempt that Huston must have undertaken to do the impossible. But I would nominate, if the novel were ever to be made into another film, that it might well be made from a Mexican perspective. And I would nominate Alejandro Iñárritu. No? Alberto?
Yes. Well, I think we all would love that filmmaker, no? The next. You know what? I think more than doing a new film of the volcano, I think we are needing urgently a new film on the life of Michael Lowry, on his inner literary worlds, no, in intradimensional world. I think we are missing that one, that new film. I hope one of you would write the screenplay. One of us, no. I don't know if you have any other questions. Yes, yes.
I was just going to come in and say that I've been pondering and thank you so much, Cheryl. I've been pondering the sort of filmmakers as well. And I thought about Almodovar, whose last film was about a filmmaker and was very fine, but of course I can't remember the title of it. But also, coming back to Merseyside, where I'm based, a lot of films are made around here. So that could be a great shot in the arm for the British film industry. But I do have a question for Cheryl, which is about Timothy Findlay, because I was very interested to hear that you'd written about Timothy Findlay, whose work I know a little bit. And I wondered whether you could say something about whether there is any connection between Lowry and Findlay and Canadian writing in general.
Sure, I thank you for that that question, Elsa. When we had our conference in Liverpool a few years ago, I actually gave a keynote talk on the relationship between Timothy Findlay and Malcolm Lowry. And I have published a little on that subject, and if you get in touch with me after the Zoom, I can look it up and give you that reference. But in brief, Timothy Findlay, born in 1930, and Canadians of that generation, if they were in the literary world, if they were wanting to be writers, they were certainly aware of Lowry and they were reading Lowry. And a very good friend of Findlay's, the late Graham Gibson, Margaret Atwood's partner, told me in an interview that everybody was reading Malcolm, everybody wanted to go to Mexico, everybody cared about Malcolm Lowry. And certainly I have not found any evidence. I've just published his biography. It's called TIFF, A Life of Timothy Findlay. And the launch is now on YouTube. So you can find it by going to YouTube and calling up either my name or Findlay. I was not able to find in Findlay's massive archives any actual commentary on Under the Volcano, but Findlay's partner told me that he was, was very captivated by Lowry. And there are ways in which one can see certain kinds of, I think, influences, but one has to be awfully careful about that because there's no hard evidence that I've found. So it's speculation. I have to be careful. I'll speculate, however, just privately with people on our Zoom, and I'll channel it through me. I think when Alberto was asking me questions, I said that I loved Under the Volcano because it was so open. It brought in so much material, history, politics, the humanity of people, and major ethical issues in the world. And I found Joyce didn't do that. I didn't like the Joycean world. I liked the Lowryian world of intellectual engagement with life. And Findlay's the same kind of writer. That's what he does in all his work. Now, his prose style is not like Lowry's, but I think there's a mind there that is similar, a creative mind that is similar to Lowry's. So they must have been, Findlay must have said, oh my God, this world is a world I recognize. I'm speculating privately with you because I know from the manuscripts that Timothy Findlay was obsessed with getting more in and never wanted to cut it out. And so stories that he had to cut out one thing would find their way into something else. And he also was one of those kinds of writers, of which Lowry is also, who took the real world and transformed it. And that can be traced, You can draw lines between, as you could with Lowry. So that's not speculative. We can actually look at manuscripts and letters and see how that, and journals to see how that's unfolding in Finley's case. So I think the answer to your question is, I feel yes, but kindred, you know, Lowry's term kindred spirits. I think that's part of what I would say Finley shared with Lowry, and with a, you know, a group of other writers who have a similar kind of creative intellectual connection with the world and with the word in the world. Kindred spirits.
Thank you. I mean, influence is a very complex thing, isn't it? There's conscious influence, unconscious influence, direct influence, indirect.
Yeah, and one has to tread very carefully there. Yeah.
But I think it's been very interesting as well to hear you talk about writers who add things on, because the creative writing wisdom is that you always cut everything out. You pare things down.
But so even with that letter, you, and my struggle to read it and to have enough breath, he's adding, and it's always end adding. In other words, you get the subject, the main verb, and then add and add and add and add and add, right? And it goes into paragraphs like that. And with Lowry, at least. Finley less so. Finley controlled that more, but yeah.
It's a perfect title, Sherrill, for the next article by you. The connection between the voyage that never ends and not wanted on the voyage.
Yes, well.
They go together quite nicely.
Yeah. Anyway, that was, thank you for that question. I've thought a lot about it as I worked on Finley, and had hoped to find some hard evidence, some concrete hard evidence, which I didn't. So it's listening to the context, people like Graham Gibson or Bill Whitehead, Finley's partner, and then just going on my instinct. But that's personal and private, just with you, right?
I'm sorry to admit that I don't know the work of Timothy Finley at all, but thank you for pointing me in his direction. And I have to agree with you 100% about the difference between James Joyce and Malcolm Lowry. Lowry's world is just warmer and more intimate and inviting, you know, despite all the horror show, hallucinogenic, you know, awfulness of the nightmare. But you said something that I've long felt.
Well, if you want, I mean, there's many places to start reading Timothy Finley, and of course, I'm not going to say that you shouldn't go right out right now and do so. I am, because I think he's a major writer, and I would put his novel Famous Last Words in the same. I have publicly, and in my biography, put Finley's novel Famous Last Words in the same category as Under the Volcano, Ulysses, and Absalom. I mean, I think in the English language for the 20th century, that is the book. It's a World War II, but it's just amazing how much he brings in and how powerful the characters are. And I won't say more, but I just do go and read it. Or if you want to begin at the beginning, you begin with something like The Wars, published in 1977, which is a much shorter book and a very beautiful and powerful book. But I think the masterpiece in Finley's oeuvre is Famous Last Words.
Fabulous, thank you.
Enjoy. Well, enjoy in the Lowry sense of enjoy.
No problem.
Does any one of you want to add any other question for Sherrill? No sé, Dany Boy, si tenemos algo por allá por el Face, sino para despedir y darle las gracias a la doctora Sherrill Grace por estar, pues, por segunda ocasión con nosotros acá.
Alberto, I just want to say goodbye to everybody. Good luck, and thank you so much for persisting in including me. I need to go because there are, as you know, personal things I take care of now. And God bless you. Everybody stay safe and well. And hasta la vista.
Sherrill, we want to thank you very much, very much for being with us today for the second time in the International Coloquio. Thank you very much. Have a big hug for you and for your family. We hope you stay well also, and that we continue with these encounters. Thank you very much, Sherrill.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye, Alberto.
Good to have seen you, Sherrill.
Gracias, muchas gracias. Muchas gracias a Sherrill. Ya le dijimos que pues estamos muy contentos por que nos haya acompañado por segunda ocasión aquí en los coloquios de la Fundación Malcolm Lowry. Y nos vamos a desconectar del Facebook, pero vamos a continuar en la sesión de Zoom. Si no hay nada más, los compañeros de la Fundación les vamos a pedir que digan unas palabras. For you, our friends in the Zoom platform, we want you to stay. We will have a little talk after this, but we are going to say goodbye on the Facebook page. Compañeros miembros de la Fundación, pues vamos a clausurar entonces. Por favor, Dany, Marcelo, adelante.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias al público por habernos seguido vía internet. Claro que como siempre en cada coloquio que hemos hecho, obviamente tendremos que terminar con un brindis de mezcal, pero antes que eso creo que, bueno, estamos pues muy contentos por haber tenido ese coloquio, por los invitados, pues los excelentes invitados que hemos tenido de Inglaterra, de Nueva Zelanda, de Canadá, de Estados Unidos, Portugal, etcétera. Y claro, la invitación es siempre adentrarse en la obra de Malcolm Lowry. Para nuestros compañeros mexicanos que no han leído Bajo el Volcán, pues la invitación es más que puesta. Seguir también leyendo otras obras. Y pues creo que es un poco la idea, ¿no? Como lo pueden ver, de todas partes del mundo, pues nos entendemos, logramos compartir acerca de la obra, crear también acerca de la obra, y creo que eso es la idea y hay que seguir. Merci beaucoup, cher public, et je vous dis à très bientôt, et nous continuons la diffusion de l'œuvre de notre cher Malcolm Lowry. Hasta pronto, amigos. Marcelo.
Graças, Dany. E assim chegamos ao fim de mais um encontro em torno de Malcolm Lowry e das suas obras, sobretudo da sua obra maior, Debaixo do Vulcão. É importante lembrar que este foi o 15º encontro que a Fundação Malcolm Lowry promoveu. Esperamos sinceramente que tenha gostado de estar connosco. Todos aprendemos mais com as enriquecedoras participações de alguns dos mais reputados especialistas lowrianos mundiais que chegaram do Canadá, como acabámos de presenciar, mas também da Nova Zelândia, dos Estados Unidos, da Inglaterra e de outros lugares. No próximo ano, no Dia dos Mortos, naturalmente, cá estaremos de novo para homenagear duas das mais figuras, das mais extraordinárias figuras que a literatura já conheceu, o cônsul Geoffrey Hurpin e Yvonne Griffithon, e naturalmente o seu criador Malcolm Lowry. Muito obrigado desde Lisboa, esperamos que tenham gostado. Alberto.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Marcelo. Solo nos resta pues hacer un brindis de honor con mezcal del cónsul. Para todos los que nos acompañan, pues levanten su copa y vamos a hacer un brindis por la obra de Malcolm Lowry, Bajo el Volcán, y por todos los amigos de la Fundación Malcolm Lowry.
Y bueno, mandar un saludo a Oscar, a Félix, nuestro Félix, que no pudo estar presente, pero está siguiendo. También Alejandro y
Andy
también. Pues felicidades a todos, enhorabuena. Y como decimos, pues no se puede vivir sin amar.
No se puede vivir sin amar. Cheers.
Y sin beber mezcal.
Ya calollar. Salud. Atasante, a vuestra santé. Y salud.
Todos contentos y yo también.
Todos contentos y yo también. The name of the cantina. Todos contentos. Bebiendo mezcal, having a mezcal. Salud for everybody.
Salud, salud.
Salud.
Salud for you, Chris, and everybody.
I just want to say, Alberto, thank you, you and Dany in particular, but everyone else as well. Thank you very, very much for doing this. It's been a wonderful experience. I love the bilingual side of it. I love listening to the Spanish. Some of which I can understand, although I haven't got enough courage to speak it. But it was just a very good 3 days. Thank you very much. Wonderful experience. I love the bilingual side. I love listening.
Thank you very much, Chris, for being with us. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everybody.
It was just a very good 3 days. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Los esperamos el próximo año. Bless you.
See you next year. And cheers.
Yes, definitely. And I'm sure we're all looking forward to the book that Marcelo has worked hard on producing, and the rest of you too. Cheers and health and pesetas. Huh?
Salud y pesetas y tiempo para gastarlas.